Unless you've lived under a rock, you know less than have heard stories about alien abductions.
Well, are they real?
What if I told you that there is physical proof left and scars that pierce more than just the human anatomy?
Men, women, even children, taken from their homes, their beds, in the middle of the night.
Animals shaking in fear and behaving in odd and unusual ways.
This might sound like your standard science fiction or horror movie, but the reality is much less entertaining.
Stay with us today as we expose the most disturbing part of the alien phenomenon. Welcome to Live Life in the Spirit. We're your host. I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Scharrenberg.
We're so glad you're joining us today. We've got some exciting things we're going to be talking about. And we have some amazing episodes before. If you have not seen them, you need to catch up. You can go back to...
You can go to our website at livelifeinthespirit.com, or you can find us on YouTube and Rumble at Live Life in the Spirit, and also all the podcast feeds.
And hey, you know what? We still have plenty of merchandising left. If you would like the God is Still Writing Your Story, Stop Stealing the Pen t-shirts, we have those available as well.
Make sure you follow, like, subscribe to make sure you're up to date on all of our content.
Before we jump in, I wanted to circle back just a little bit. Last episode, we talked about the things that were in the papers now, that's in the news media, that's in everything that's going on, and all of this is being declassified information.
Brought to light, yes.
Right. And what should come up on my phone, but actually from the Vatican. And it was about Italy actually possessing a ship. But we know this because the Vatican has been following this for years. In fact, they have the big, massive telescope on Mount Graham. Bigger, more expensive than anything that any world government owns. I want you to think about that for a moment. And the letters actually, the words actually spell out Lucifer. Dr. Thomas Horn from Skywatch TV and Russ Dizdar actually had gone to Mount Graham. They spoke with the priests that run the facility and actually watch the traffic that's going on. And they got actually some pretty candid conversation back and forth with them off the record. But they mentioned that they had a hard time seeing things like farther planet-wise, star-wise, because of all of the traffic that was in the
closer vicinities.
And they were talking exactly about what you think they were talking about. Mm-hmm. That being said, though, what this little clip, and I'm going to put it up there for you, because what it got right down to was they were talking about what this does to religion, to people's faith. That's what we've been talking about all along. They said, well, does this change the whole Adam and Eve narrative then? And then what's that like with who our creators really are? You notice how they jumped to that right away. Mm-hmm. I have not heard one story from anyone who said, oh, look, God created other people. No, it's always replacing. So,
replacement theology.
We've had that for
a long time.
Thousands and thousands of years. So anyway, we'll play that clip just right here.
A while back, News Nation reported a claim from a Pentagon whistleblower that back during World War II, Pope Pius XII tipped off the U.S. government about the recovery of a partially intact UFO that Benito Mussolini's Italian government had discovered. Beyond Catholics, if people start to realize that it's not an Adam and Eve story and it's not just Earth and there's a lot more to it, there goes religion.
The canonical, doctrine of many religions is very kind of set in stone. And so to go back and kind of rewrite history and to say, okay, well, perhaps not only we're not the only ones in the universe, but what if they don't look like us? Would that mean that people lose their faith? So all those questions is kind of what the theory is as to why perhaps they believe that either people are not ready for this or that they should indefinitely keep it covered up.
Building up to this episode, we've talked about UFO and UAP sightings, we've talked about alien encounters, we've talked about animal and cattle mutilation, but now we're really getting to the heart of all of it. Human abductions. I will fully admit that there was a time when I heard that phrase, it brought to mind uneducated country folks drinking beer, talking about being taken. It took a long time for me to give any credence to that idea, but the more we've studied and the more we've researched, the more I've realized that it truly isn't a joke and it isn't an entertaining phenomenon. It's terrifying, actually.
And a lot of these instances, I mean, they started when they were little kids, and they have
gone through horrific things.
Yes, they've been badgering them for ever.
Right, their whole life. Grooming them.
Well, not only that, but when you start having then physical evidence that's left behind that you cannot then discredit at all, besides the emotional scars that have gone with this.
Well, and just the similarity among stories from people who've never crossed paths. People that have never even heard of such a thing until after they've been through it themselves. It's really quite amazing and unnerving.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of grew up a little bit more with an interest in your family in UFOs and aliens and some of that kind of stuff. Was there ever any talk about abductions?
You know, I don't remember so much about the abduction other than my dad always going, I want to be the first. But, you know, this is before, well, really honestly, until about the last 10 years ago, I was not really that much inept on what truly was the agenda going on behind this. Mm-hmm. We had had a UFO encounter. I've actually had a couple of them, but not up close. Mm-hmm. Just that we knew that it was not a plane.
Right.
And then one was probably about 5 years ago. Again, this thing was following the car as we were going, and you knew definitely that it was probably something of that nature. But other than that, I mean, no, I have not had any visitations or anything like that. But when I have read these stories, and I have talked to people that have, the depth of their encounter that they express, I mean, it is so deep, just it pierces your soul. People would not make this up.
Right.
In fact, most of them don't tell anybody about it because they don't want the fame. So if somebody was to say, oh, they're just doing it to get attention, or they're just making these things up, why? Right. Why would you? And the scars, physical scars that have been left behind. And we're going to get into implants, and we're going to get into pregnancies, and we're going to get into a lot of stuff coming up that you just cannot brush away.
No. And the fact that, we have so much of the scientific community, the psychological community did in fact just brush them away, has left this group of people who have been through some very traumatic events with nowhere to turn. And so that's one of the important reasons for getting this out, aside from obviously knowing what's really coming.
Well, and I think the big thing is the church has been completely silent on this.
Absolutely. Dangerously so.
Yes, and I get to a certain extent the sensationalism and stuff, you're not going to probably talk a whole lot about that. However, since we do know what is behind it, and we do know that we have people that are sitting out in the pews that have probably had these kind of encounters, that have buried it or tried to bury it, or they would not share it. They think they're the only one. They think they're alone.
They think people would think they were crazy, or that they lost their mind,
or then maybe they're not a good enough Christian.
Yes, because that has been another big part of the really this deception that we've told ourselves.
Right.
What just completely broke my heart was the number of people. I would have thought it was a rare occasion, maybe a few hundred people over the last. There are upwards of 3.7 million people in the United States alone that have reported abduction stories.
And that's who's reported.
Exactly.
Not all the ones who have not.
This is a very underreported phenomenon. Anything like this would be. And that's just in the United States. If you go worldwide, the numbers are staggering.
Well, and if you take, that's who's reported, so then you're considered as a one number. But if you've been abducted multiple times throughout your whole life, that
the number just continues to increase.
And this goes not just from little kids. I mean, if you, the more you dig into it and you look, we have people that are in their 70s and their 80s that are still being abducted. And you go, oh, okay, now wait a minute. We know that the majority of the reason for this is for tampering with genetics, and for biology, it's sperm and it's egg and it's fetuses. Why would you be messing with an 80-year-old person? Unless they're doing other experiments that have to do with mind control.
Well, and just from what we know of these beings, I mean, I think even just, if someone has been taken that many times and over the course of their life, they certainly have developed like a Stockholm syndrome. They've grown fond or attached to these entities. But to me, the other thing was, I mean, they like that power and that control. They might just like kind of the little worship reverence that they have for them. I mean, I think it's quite possible they just are enjoying the power trip.
Even with a lot of the people, now not all of them, some of them have drank the Kool-Aid big time, but then there are some that they're still in complete fear of them. But when it comes to, hey, we can rid you of this, or we can remove implants, oh no, I can't do that. And that's where you see the split. One could be the fear that if I do that, then they're going to come after me and it'll be something way worse.
Right.
Or, as you said, it could be that's my attachment to, that's why I'm different. That's why I'm special. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But they have the proof.
Oh, absolutely.
That this has been going on.
Lots of people who have been abducted, and of these millions of people that they've talked to, they report some very similar experiences. Across the board, there's some things that almost all of them report a number of these. One of them is hearing or almost feeling like a high-pitched frequency, or like the air was vibrating. It's very quiet. And some of them have reported just in the sightings of the actual saucers that it was like the sound had been sucked out.
But like a vacuum.
But when the beings get close, it's just this sense of vibrating and a very high frequency.
Well, they just show up.
Yes.
It's like they can pass through walls. And here's the other thing. When they take people, the people can pass through walls. There are different accounts where some people do remember being sucked up through a roof and other ones through the window.
Closed window.
Closed window, yes. And wondering. Some of them were awake enough that they're wondering how they're going to go through that, and then they just do. The other thing that is common with most all of them is they talk about a switch if they've been abducted multiple times, that they just shut you off.
Yes.
How they do that, I don't know, because some people are like, it'd be like when you take Versed. If you've ever gone in for surgery and you're awake and then you're shut off.
Right.
You're asleep, you're twilight.
They're like, count backwards from 100 and you get to 90, and then you're out.
That's kind of what's going on here. Most of them are just shut off so they don't remember. Others, though, are not shut off.
Right. And have a lot more recollection.
Oh, yeah. And the terror and the fear and then the being paralyzed.
Yes, and that's another common theme, is just this concept of not reacting the way they know they should, as if they're paralyzed in fear, or like, oh my gosh, I heard something that I can't explain. I'm going to close my eyes and just pretend it's not there, when they know like they should be reacting in a different way.
Especially if these things have come back a second time. You would think they would be jumping out of bed and running out of your room or screaming or doing something. But it's like they can't. They don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah, and then they genuinely, it's a sleep paralysis, which we'll talk about that later, but just this concept of, I'm fully conscious, I'm aware of what's happening. This idea that even if you wanted to scratch your nose, that you couldn't, like you just can't make yourself physically move. That would be terrifying. I've had little instances of that for short bits of time, but I can't imagine experiencing that when I was like fully awake and something horrible was happening. That would be awful.
There is actually a little difference, though, with the names of what they go by. Some of them have an array of long names, or, as most people probably have said, we call them alien grays.
Right.
What they normally see is short, about 4 foot, big size head, big black eyes that you can see straight through. Almost everyone has said it's like they're soulless.
And they've also said it's like they can see inside you, like both directions, that their eyes are definitely not like ours. Well, and one person had reported in this process of sort of being floating up and whatnot, that they felt like they were in a million different pieces.
So fragmented almost.
Right.
Molecularized so they could go through.
They could go through, which would explain if there was some sort of energy source that they were being beamed up, you know?
Well, and I think that's why the romanticized part of this back in the 70s and the 80s, Star Trek was the big thing.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, everybody, that was the first sci-fi thing really that came out that made a big mark and talked about all this stuff. In fact, they would go to all these planets and they're aliens of all different kinds, you know, and it was, a lot of them were more than not so much hostile. I mean, they were friendly and they were...
Yeah, I mean, there was the good and evil even amongst the...
But there was just that whole, oh, this is so cool, I want to be a part of that. And I think that's really where my dad was, that generation.
Oh, of
because
course.
That's why he just, you know, loved astronaut. In fact, my folks were married when man walked on the moon, you know. I mean, pretty much. It was like within just weeks. So that was the mantra back then.
Of course.
Until it actually happens to you.
Oh, yeah. I don't have any desire to sign up to be on that list.
Well, the ones who actually then were not shut off, that remembered exactly what happened. They all described the same thing, that they were on some big metal table and they were covered just a white sheet. Usually the clothes were always missing and they were constantly being probed everywhere. I mean, even in their brain. And of course, we've said the main thing was trying to create skin suits in an army and whatnot. So yes, the big thing was sperm and eggs, and that's what they would take from most everybody and collect. And I'm sure they were taking blood samples too.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes, because and lots of people mentioned needles in different places.
Well, one guy even mentioned the pain from just this thing touching him.
And that lasted for months.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because they all have these, or most have these chunks of time missing. Most of them, they don't remember all of it. You know, they remember kind of bits and pieces. But the other part was that they feel like they were being communicated with. But the majority of them, it wasn't auditory. It was like they were telepathically being communicated with. It's not like we know how to do that on a regular basis. So definitely something...
But it would be something more like, which explains dealing with the interdimensional realm. I mean, when you talk to God, and when God talks to you, for most people, they'll say, you know, it's on your heart, or it's on your mind, or whatever. It's because he's speaking to you, but he's doing it on a different level. But guess what? When they talk about the good angel and the bad angel on your shoulders talking to you. Well, yeah, the voices that you get talking to you in your head, that's from the demonic realm and
the angelic realm.
Angelic realm. And it's telepathically, basically, in a sense.
Oh, absolutely. So many of them, they wake back up and they're home in bed, or they're, you know, sometimes they're like out in the middle of a field, but a lot of times they're back home in bed. But they'll notice that maybe their clothes aren't put on the right way. Some of them said like their clothes were backwards, or the buttons aren't quite right, you know what I mean? Which is, I always thought that was interesting. Like, they have the technology to do all of that, but pajamas are like beyond, you know. But they'll have, again, this spotty or spotty memory, or just like chunks of things that they can remember. But a lot of it's gone, and that would be upsetting to just to know that something had happened and to have little snippets
and not know to the full extent of what it was.
Which is very common in trauma in general. And then if you have things that are changing your memory anyways, it's
well,
hard.
And then when you wake up in the morning and you have these scars and these marks and these scratches and stuff on your body that you have no explanation for, and where they're at, you can't really recreate them,
right?
You know.
We've talked about this sleep paralysis, or this temporary paralysis that's very common, but this sheer terror and like the feeling, the presence of evil or darkness, or lots of time people will use demonic. I mean, they know that something is not right and not good about this.
Vicki Joy Anderson, she's kind of become the spokesperson. She goes into great depth on the sleep paralysis and the different kinds, where you have a sleep paralysis from dreaming, you can have sleep paralysis from night terrors, then you have sleep paralysis from abductions, and she gets into how could this possibly happen. Well, she started after many years realizing that it comes from trauma too. She had no idea, after talking to many experts and stuff, that the trauma that you can receive as a child, even if it's not the kind of trauma that you would think of as sexual abuse or physical abuse, but in her situation, it was just she had deformities and with all the surgeries and all the stuff and the being made fun of and the missing so much time and people being the butt of jokes and all this stuff, it just heaped on so much anger and frustration and hurt and everything that she said she did not realize that trauma had carried through her whole life, and it actually opened doors.
And I've seen that countless times, even in just the mental health field, that when someone has trauma, those that seek weakness can take advantage of someone who has trauma. Well, if we can figure that out here, which I'm sure that also has a demonic influence to it, but you can't tell me that other beings aren't going to also take advantage of that. Not that someone who's been through trauma is weak, but it creates, it breaks down walls and kind of puts up some different barriers that might protect you. And so it's not surprising to me that that's a thing.
And then we talked about the Stockholm Syndrome, but a lot of them, especially the little kids, when they start out little, they're told that, you cannot tell anyone what happened. They threaten them and they threaten killing all their loved ones, or they put fake memories in their mind.
Yes.
I know there were some that are now older, but they remember when they were younger that they were told that if they ever said anything, they saw pictures in their mind of this horrible accident and their family all dying in this car accident of flames. And so, it wouldn't take too much to scare somebody into silence.
So the common thread, though, that really highlights what these things are is this. So at any point during the abduction, if someone is conscious and they think of it and they call on the name of Jesus, everything stops. They're back home safe and sound. If there was any question that these things were our actual creators or some sort of space brothers and sisters
who didn't even know who Jesus was or anything to do with that,
calling on his name would do nothing. But countless times, if again, that's not to say that just being a Christian will stop it, because we've talked about they switch these people off a lot of times. But if someone has enough sense and enough consciousness to be able to cry out to him, that's it. And let that sink in.
That's their telltale sign right there. And the other thing we talked about too, so a lot of these people would say they were not Christians to begin with, and then they accepted Christ, and these things left them alone. They've been bugging them their whole life, and all of a sudden they leave them alone. But then it would start in again. Now for some, they would say, well, I quit going to church, and what they really did was they kind of walked away from God a little bit, let life happen. And then these things showed up again.
Because they opened the door to these influences. There's so many things in this world that we can do that opens that door.
That's kind of what I liked, what Vicki Joy said. She read from Psalms 27 and Psalms 91. Of course, Psalms 91 is all about spiritual warfare, the whole thing. But with both of them, it keeps talking about being under his tent. And who's his? God. It's not, I kind of likened it to you last night about like a king. You have a king over a whole kingdom, and his job is to protect the kingdom. But if you live in this little village over here, he can't protect you immediately if somebody comes in and attacks. But if you were living in his castle, you're going to be a lot more protected. And that's what Psalms 27, it keeps talking about. There is a difference about that being under his tent. We can say we're Christians, and I've heard this from way too many people. You ask them if they know the resurrection story, and they go, "Well, not really, but I'm a Christian." You're like, "No,
you can't have one without the other."
I know it's nuts. You got to know
the resurrection story.
The resurrection story, or else you're not a Christian. Because how could you believe in Jesus if you don't know
the whole point of what he came and did?
You can have people that say, "Well, I'm Christian and I was still abducted," but they're not living the Christian life, or they're not living under the tent of God.
Not that any of us live perfectly by any stretch, but we have to be striving to living set apart. You know, we've talked about that so many times, that we are called to be in the world, but not of the world.
And too many Christians, and I mean, of course, we live in the world, so it's hard not to. We're not Amish, you know, nothing is Amish. That's the whole point. They figured out how to not live of the world.
Right.
I mean, they don't watch the things we watch. They don't listen to the kind of music we listen to. They don't do the kind of things we do. They don't wear the clothes that we wear. That's the point.
They've set themselves apart.
When we live under God's tent, we are set apart, and we are to live differently, think differently, talk differently, act differently. That's really the key.
Right.
You can say you're a Christian, but if you're not acting and talking and thinking differently, then you still have left yourself wide open and vulnerable. You're in one of the camps outside. Well,
Absolutely.
I'm under his authority, sort of, but yeah, I'll take my chances.
Distant relative.
Well, a couple on that then. There's a few testimonies of people that we were going to kind of just bring up to you. I mean, there are a lot. A lot of them all have the same familiar stories. Even they don't realize how many were out there until they hear others talking about the same thing, and they go, "Oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one." But we wanted to share some of these with you, because just to show you the seriousness of this.
And it might make you feel a little bit unsettled. I know it has me. We watched so many testimonies from so many people, and the impact that this has had on their lives. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to give you just some examples to make it more human, to make it more real, so that you could hear what these individuals went through. Now, like I said, we watched countless stories on YouTube and DVDs we've had, and so a couple of live conferences that we attended. Some of these stories you can find through Eli Marzulli. He has an entire series on UFOs.
Abduction, cattle mutilation.
All of that, a lot of that information, or some of it came from there. And then we went to a lot of different sources. If you go to YouTube and put in a search, you'll find all kinds of information. Mm-hmm. So one gentleman, when he said when he was 17, he dabbled in dark arts a little bit. He mentioned that because he realized later that that's probably what opened the door at that point in time. And when he was 19, he saw something in the sky at night, and he wanted to go check it out. He's out there standing on the porch, kind of staring off over the field, and looks down, and he realizes his dog is standing next to him and is just shaking, and his scruff is all up, and he peed on himself. I mean, the poor dog was terrified. And he said all of a sudden it looked like a knife had cut a perfect hole in the sky. He could see this bright light coming through it, and then it was like the light was shut off. He went back to bed. He didn't go in and talk to his younger brother at that point in time, and he was just kind of like, I don't know what just happened, but I'm gonna go to bed and go to sleep and hope that I don't ever remember this. But unfortunately, he remembers that night waking up on that metal table with only a sheet on. He says he remembers he could kind of look down and see that his feet were sticking out.
That kind of seems to be another common
theme.
thing. Feet are sticking out over the sheet. I think they would make the sheets big enough.
Maybe they all have foot fetishes.
I don't know.
So again, he was experiencing that, being fully conscious but unable to move. And he remembers seeing that there were these kind of alien grays, again, the short, with those black piercing eyes. that there were several of them in the room, and he felt like they were communicating with him, but they weren't speaking to him out loud. But he remembers being terrified, absolutely terrified. And one of them was coming, like they were kind of closing in around him, and he remembers one of them reaching out its hand, and that its fingers were inordinately long, like just, and there were lots of people that reported these sort of odd long fingers, and he was like, I do not want them to touch me. And it went, and it touched him, and it was painful, like just piercing pain, and then that light switch was off, and he was gone, and he didn't remember anything after that until he woke back up. And that pain, though, from where that being touched him, lasted for months.
I remember his mom finally telling him he needed to go to the doctor and have it checked out.
But he wouldn't, because he said, how was I going to explain where that came from? He was terrified that what if they found something? How would he explain that? This was not something he talked about. And he was one of the ones that didn't talk about this for a very long time. So he knows that they took semen from him and performed other sexual acts. And he remembers being abducted a few times over the course of a couple of years. And then a couple of years after that first time, he became a Christian. And he turned his life over to Christ. And everything stopped.
Well, the big thing was, him and many of the other ones that talked about this, it was the whole violation. Mm-hmm. This wasn't oh, look what happened to me. No. Everything was horrible and twisted and demonic and complete violent. Many of them called it rape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not something that
you're going to want to make up.
No, and not something that you're going to talk about freely. Mm-hmm. Especially when you had, that was really the common theme that was pushed, was that it's just a bunch of people who don't have anything better to talk about, so they're going to make up stories about being, taken. So again, he hadn't talked about this experience with anyone, and he's well into adulthood. So he was walking in a bookstore and happened to walk by this book called Communion by Whitley Strieber, and picked it up, and he said it changed his life, because it was the first time he ever learned that other people had been through experiences like his. And so he started researching and finding out that he was not alone. And that really had a huge impact, because he had kept it quiet for so long. And it was interesting because he was talking about this, but he had yet to tell anyone in his family about this. He was sort of talking publicly to some UFO researchers and some different things, but he had not told his family about it yet. I think he knew the time was coming, but it was still a really difficult subject.
Well, it would be hard. Especially for your folks to say, under our own roof, it's like, why you and not us? Or
Yeah. When it was interesting, because about a year after that, he heard that same noise at night. And that moment he heard it, he called on the name of Jesus, and it never came again. So it was like they're just checking, because he'd been kind of doing some more research and getting back into it, and I suppose they wondered. Mm-hmm. But he was truly saved at that point in time and called on Jesus, and that was enough.
This is the problem, though, when you have the ones that have been able to call on the name of Jesus, and it does stop. And then you have other people who have called the name, and it doesn't stop. Who have given their life to Christ, and it doesn't stop. Or who've been paralyzed and unconscious
and couldn't call out.
Yeah.
It's hard to understand and explain that. But it was interesting. One of the things he said towards the end of that was that a few years later, he got together, kind of had a class reunion or a reunion with some of his friends that he'd had back during that time. And they were all just talking and got to talking about the fact that during that time period, there was a ton of UFO activity in the area. And lots of them, kind of shared some different stories and experiences. He still didn't talk a whole lot, because I think his was much more than what they were talking about even. But he found it fascinating that there was just a ton of activity in the area at the time. Obviously, he was not the only one.
Well, there's another gentleman that was taken when he was, actually, it started when he was 3, but he didn't really remember it until he was 5. I think it was his sister who told him that it was when he was about 3. They were taken many times over the course of his life, and they told him that they put a chip in him and they can monitor what he did. Well, as an adult, he looked for someone to try to remove it, which some say they don't want it removed, but this guy actually wanted it gone.
He did.
We got connected with L.A. Marzulli, who then got him hooked up. Dr. Roger Creven Lear. He is one of the leading, he has now since passed.
Right.
But he was a podiatrist that would also go in and surgically remove these things. That kind of became his new
thing.
Yeah, his new profession, I guess, in a way, especially. So there are cases all around the world about people who are having implants put in other odd foreign objects in their body, and they have no earthly source. When they pull them out, they're not metals that are known to this world. They're not, in fact, some of them aren't even metal. That's why metal detector doesn't always pick it up. But typically, they always have a radiation reading that is a telltale sign. So this one lady that we just were watching today, I said she was like in her 80s, and she had an implant actually in the base of her skull. And she had the CT scans to show it. I mean, they measured it, and they knew it was 0.7 millimeters. It was pretty good size.
And I want to say she had like 7 or 8, though, throughout her body. I mean, she had multiple.
And she had one she knew in her shoulder. But when they asked if she would ever have them removed, now I could see why she maybe not want the one in her brain removed, possibly. But even the one in her shoulder, she was like, no. And then she said, well, because that's what kept her connected.
And she's still working with them, I think.
Yeah, that was the word she said, working with.
Yeah.
What are they working, what did they, you wonder how long she's been abducted, if she was little, if this whole mind thing had been going on throughout her life, brainwashing.
Well, and that Dr. Roger Lear really was the only one who would tackle these cases when a lot of other doctors just wouldn't mess with it. They didn't want to deal with it. But the story of that gentleman and how his was removed, tell that, because that's just amazing.
Unbelievable. So he goes in and he actually has the x-ray, and it shows that this implant's just below his knee and his tibia. And so Dr. Lear was going to go in and remove it, and L.A. Marzulli was actually with them in the room when they were going to do it, and they were running the ultrasound over it because they had seen it before, and this is the day of surgery, and as they go in, they can't find it. For almost 2 hours, they are searching for this thing, and they cannot find it at all. Yeah, they have the x-rays to prove that it was there,
right there,
but now it's not showing up. And finally, after it was getting close to that 2-hour mark, L.A. Marzulli all of a sudden said, I think it's cloaked. And he said, do you mind? Because the people that were in the room were not believers.
Right.
He says, do you mind if I say a prayer? And they agreed to it. And so he prayed a prayer that would uncloak the thing, that God would show them what they were going for. And just like that, within 5 minutes, it showed up
on the screen.
It appeared up on the ultrasound and everything. They were able to go in and they pulled it out. And I mean, it was probably about that big and that long. Of unknown origin.
And again, if this was not something nefarious and sinister, then praying about it isn't going to do a darn bit of good.
And the fact that it could cloak and uncloak. Well, Daryl Sims is a UFOologist, and he has spent years, actually, I don't know how he's been able to come up with this, but he had just a whole case full of implants from people.
Right.
And they looked all different kind. It wasn't the same.
Which is, I mean, to me that's fascinating, because that means they're doing different things. This isn't all for one purpose. Yes.
Exactly. They're not just like a homing device or something.
Yeah.
The lady who we had talked about that had the implant in her head and in her shoulder.
Barbara Eberhardt.
Yes, that was her name. They spent a little more time talking about the mind control. In fact, this gentleman has said with a lot of the people, that was the first thing that came up was mind control with these implants, but changing the inside, changing the DNA, actually feeling your molecular structure, besides going through a roof, but just on a daily basis,
changing.
somehow. That part is what's scary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're going to get into that even maybe a little more. But we wanted to talk about Karen Wilkinson.
Yeah.
This gal is phenomenal. It took forever, but she actually wrote her book. It's called Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest. Her story is one that is probably the most heartbreaking of any that we've heard. I mean, and I've heard her story multiple times.
And every time
you just
you just really feel for her. So her abduction experiences started when she was around 4 or 5. And she had, she called a handler, starting from when she was very young. And each and every time she was taken, she saw this handler, like it was a person. She said he looked humanish. You know, he looked a lot, mostly human, but you could tell that he wasn't. But the thought was, I think the thought process was having this consistent person would make her feel safe, and she felt connected to him, and those kinds of things. Really, in hindsight, what was happening is he was grooming her. But obviously at the time, she didn't know what was happening.
Well, when she was taken many times, she remembers seeing other kids, a lot of kids there. But then she also remembers seeing behind some of the windows what looked like children, but they were not.
Right.
I mean, there was something wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
They were not human.
But once she hit kind of that around 16, things changed with this handler. And their relationship changed, and it was he no longer felt safe because he raped her, and they performed, she said, like sexual rituals and some different things. And again, these were places and situations that she had no control.
She went to like a church revival, a youth group thing or whatever, and she met Jesus there, and she gave her life to Christ. And she said all this stopped, completely stopped. And life was good, and she got married. She had a husband, you know, things were going good. Well. But then she kind of pulled away a little bit. I mean, she just wasn't going to church all the time. And, you know, not that she was still a Christian. She just didn't have that close one-on-one relationship anymore. And then when she was around 20, she found out she was pregnant, went to the doctor, and they confirmed it with the blood test and even an ultrasound when she was about 3 months along and could see the baby. And so they're all excited, and she just assumed it was her husband's, but she felt like she had been taken again. And when she was about 3 months along, she woke up in the middle of the night in excruciating pain, just a little bit of spotting, but that was it.
Right.
And so she immediately went to the emergency room because they had just taken the ultrasound like a week before. Yeah, or so, and the heart, could see the heartbeat, you know, everything. And when she got there, there was nothing. There was no fetus. There was no heartbeat. They asked her, when did you do a DNC? She goes, I've never had anything done. She had not aborted the baby.
She hadn't miscarried.
It just disappeared. And in fact, her whole uterus was as though she had never been pregnant, except the blood work still showed
that elevated levels of HCG.
This didn't just happen one time.
No. 3 different times she was found to be pregnant, confirmed pregnant. She would get to about 3 months along, and then all of a sudden the baby would be gone.
With no trace.
With no trace. With no pregnant. Miscarriage, no any of that kind of stuff. I can't imagine that in and of itself, what that would do. I mean, it would be one thing to have a loss and have a miscarriage and understand, at least medically, what happened. But to have them just disappear?
And have no explanation for it. Well, the other thing, too, so then she started listening to L.A. Marzulli and realizing who these things were. Had rechanged her whole thought process. And then knowing that if they are from the Nephilim, that there is no soul and there's no redemption. What she said there really broke our hearts at first. She said she realized she prayed and prayed it was just too much to bear the thought that 3 of her children would never have the chance of redemption. But she was in hopes, because they were part her, that maybe there would be some slim chance. But then something happened one particular night.
She said she woke up in the middle of the night and had a sense that she wasn't alone again. And she looked, and there were 3, like, young, she called them children, but they weren't completely human children. And she said that they looked like her, and she just knew that they were her children. But she said that she could just feel the evil in them as well.
Well, in the eyes, she said she realized that they were soulless. And that there was no possibility of redemption for them. And
that really broke her heart. And to this day, when she talked about it, she couldn't talk about it without breaking down. And I can't imagine how awful that would be.
For her specific example, she said that then after all that had happened with the kids and everything, she came back to the Lord, and when she called on the name of Jesus the next time, they left her alone, and it stopped.
Thousands of women have reported stories like this. She is by far not alone. The number of women who have had pregnancies that disappeared without a trace. There are ones that remember being taken and having that embryo taken from them. I mean, so many women have been through this, and it brings you, all of this brings us to why. Why is this happening? Why are animals and cattle being mutilated and drained of blood? Why are humans being abducted? Why are sexual acts being performed on them, and embryos stolen, and eggs and semen and all of that kind of stuff? Why? What's the plan here? And as we've said,
Chuck Missler has always said that Satan is outnumbered 2 to 1, so he is creating an army. We know that these are the Nephilim. These are the disembodied spirits of the giants of old from Genesis 6. Those that died in the flood. They are looking for skin suits.
That's right.
They are looking for whatever they can get in, so to speak.
Because they can't, and they don't have a body. They don't have a body. And so they're making them.
And that's why the cattle mutilation, because bovine blood is the closest to human blood. And so if they can drain all that out and use it, some of these people that were abducted, they've talked about seeing, like,
big vats of
big vats of their blood, or people, things in this.
Like an incubator kind of situation, or growing like a womb. Like they've created an artificial womb to grow.
The other thing too is a lot of the people who have seen them have said that if they're not alien greys, that they're reptilian.
Yes.
That they've seen scales, felt the scales. Others have seen the reptilian eyes. Some have been able to shape shift. In fact, there are many people who will even say that they are walking among us. But you know, that could be scary. We also know that the Bible says, be aware, because you could be entertaining angels unaware. And you know, we always think of that as, oh, the good angels, but it could go either way.
Absolutely.
Depends on who you run around with. You know, yes, it's for hospitality, but at the same time, there's a whole big long thing in multiple places in the New Testament that talk about discernment.
Oh, 100%.
And not just discerning spirits, but discerning way beyond.
Absolutely.
Those spirits.
Jesus even tells us to be as gentle as doves, and as wise and shrewd as serpents. So it's not just all open arms and hearts. You gotta be careful.
We're bringing this to you today because we know that there's probably some people out there that are watching this that you've dealt with this, or you know somebody who has dealt with this, but because of shame or because of maybe fear, because
guilt.
you were told that something horrible would happen if you said anything, or guilt, or that you have remained silent and you have lived in torture this whole time. You're not alone. And I think that was one of the biggest things when he got multiple people together that their stories were so close, and they got to hear each other's stories, and that's what just really caused the emotional flood and release, because they could not believe that other people had experienced the same things that they had.
And going through something like that, knowing that you're not alone,
It's so powerful.
it would be life-changing.
I can't sit here and tell you why some Christians are abducted, why other ones, when they've called on the name of Jesus, it's worked and it hasn't for others. I don't know the whole story. You know, just because you call on the name, but you don't have a relationship with him, it doesn't always mean that it's not a magical wand or a tool or talisman, and I think that's what a lot of people anymore think.
Right.
I can do whatever I want, I can live the life I want, I'll just call out on his name and then I'll be saved and everything's fine. That's
a slippery slope.
it's not what we're called. As we said before, we're called to be set apart. But I do know that if you take Psalms 27 to heart, and you live under his tent, it's a threshold covenant, it's a bridal covenant. When you are willing to marry yourself with Jesus, when you're willing to put the world aside and become his, let him be your bridegroom, you come under that protective banner.
Right.
And for any of you who are married, if you're in a loving marriage, your spouse is not going to let anything touch you if they have anything to say about it.
Right.
So if you think about that as Jesus being the bridegroom, he is not going to allow anything nefarious to harm his bride.
So this series has been one that's been maybe difficult to hear, that has maybe talked about things that have stretched your brain, stretched your faith, stretched your worldview. Good. Because what is coming is going to stretch it so much further, and we don't want anyone to be caught unawares. We don't want you to be a part of the elect who is deceived.
So we keep saying this is the big deception that's coming. If you have not accepted Christ as your Savior, I so encourage you to do so, and do it today. Don't wait, because we never know when the bridegroom is coming back for his bride, the church. You are not going to want to be one of the 5 virgins that are left without oil in their lamp, because if that is the case, you will be here during this deception part of it. And that's the whole point. As they say, when we go up, they show up. And that is coming. It is coming. And if all you got to do is watch the news, watch the headlines in the papers, so much information is coming out. It is just a matter of time before they make their appearance. It's not if, it's when. And it's all about when. We're going to be getting into the AI, which is affecting us right now as we speak too, but how that actually links with the Antichrist and why that is so huge and how that's even going to affect the military powers of those end times. We are right here, folks. In fact, we've been doing it the last several years. It's going to be a very charged episode next time. I'm excited about that as well. But again, we don't want you to be unaware. What you choose to do with this
is up to you. But you can't say, we didn't tell you.
So until next time,
Live long and prosper.